For Leah, who was in her second year of university, the night shift job at the nursing home was the best option. Less work, more pay, and most importantly, enough time to sleep. The nursing home building was over 100 years old and had 6 floors. Each floor had a narrow, long hallway with rooms on either side. With no security guards or nurses, Leah and her colleague Jody were the only ones who stayed in the building at night, with Leah responsible for the 3rd to 6th floors. The hardest part of the job was when the nursing home phone alarm indicated a room on the 6th floor, and Leah had to go there from the office on the 3rd floor without an elevator. That was the worst thing that could happen, of course, before the incident on February 17th, 2022, in the last room on the 6th floor. The room belonged to the calmest and least troublesome resident in the nursing home, a blind and religious elderly woman named Violet. During the 3 months Leah worked at the nursing home, Violet was the only one who not only had made no trouble, but also never had her room alarm go off. For this reason, when that night the nursing home phone alarm woke Leah up and Violet's room number appeared on it, Leah was sure Violet had accidentally pressed the button. Such incidents usually happened when elderly people rolled over in their sleep, and it was nothing strange. This assumption made Leah ignore the alarm, even when it went off again for the 2nd time, not wanting to disturb her comfortable sleep. But minutes later, for the 3rd time, everything was different. Leah's eyes were heavy with sleep, and this time the alarm continued incessantly, which meant only one thing: Violet was in trouble. Leah quickly ran up the stairs of the building to the 6th floor. All the lights were off so the patients can sleep through the nights. The alarm was continuously going off, however. When she entered the hallway of the 6th floor, it wasn't just the alarm she could hear. Violet's screams could be heard all over the hallways. Leah hurried herself to the end of the hallway and entered Violet's room. As soon as she turned on the light, the first thing that caught her eye was Violet's pale and terrified face, clutching her cross tightly in her hands, repeating the sentence, "Don't let them take me." She surely had a nightmare. This was the first thought that crossed Leah's mind as she took Violet's hands and tried to calm her down. But Violet hadn't been asleep. She was talking about strangers she had seen in her waking state, intending to take her away, strangers who were still in the room. Leah realized this when she was trying to convince Violet that she was dreaming, and that no one could take her out of her room. Violet's response was bizarre. "Tell that to those 3. Violet's sentence terrified Leah, not only because Violet had whispered it so softly into her ear as if they weren't alone in the room, but more importantly because Violet was blind, yet her terrified gaze was fixed on a spot in the room as if she could see people standing behind Leah. Violet was a reasonable and logical woman, and Leah knew this well. That's why Leah looked behind her with fear to understand what had caught Violet's attention. There was nothing to be seen except for a wooden sculpture of Jesus Christ mounted on the wall, and Leah breathed a sigh of relief. Leah stayed in the room for minutes until Violet fell asleep again. During the 3 months she had known Violet, she had never experienced any hallucinations. Nevertheless, what happened that night was merely the beginning of the hallucinations of an elderly woman, which at her age were considered natural, and Leah was familiar with them. But the incident that happened 10 days later had nothing to do with Violet's hallucinations. Leah had to take 10 days off for university exams. The night she returned to work, she arrived a little later, and the young girl who replaced Jody had checked all the rooms, making Leah's job easier than usual. She had stretched out in her room and was watching YouTube when, around 1 o'clock, the nursing home phone alarm went off again. It was Violet's room number that appeared on the phone this time. Without delay, Leah rushed herself to the 6th floor in Violet's room. What she saw was unbelievable. The room was completely empty with no trace of Violet or her room furnishings. Violet had passed away in her sleep a week ago, exactly 3 days after the incident that Leah thought was just a hallucination. But what had terrified Leah wasn't the incident 10 days ago, and Violet's mysterious words about the 3 strangers in the room. It was that the motion sensor in Violet's room was still alarming, while Leah stood in front of the door and saw no one inside. That was the last time Leah worked the night shift. This incident occurred in 2020 in one of the nursing homes located in the Frederiksberg neighborhood in the city of Copenhagen, Denmark. When Anne started her job as a helper in the nursing home, it didn't take long for her to realize that there was terrifying rumor about one of the rooms on the 3rd floor. The old staff avoided room number 6, and they would assign the tasks there to new helpers like Anne. The room belonged to an 85-year-old man named Henry, who loved his books, and the only thing he brought with him to the nursing home was his large library. That's why they called him the librarian. Henry was a grumpy old man with a frightening face, a bony figure, and pierced blue eyes that even glint in the darkness of the night, and he hated when someone entered his room, except for reading late at night when he needed help with moving his books. But what scared others about Henry wasn't his face or bad manners. It was a feeling that came after entering his room, the feeling that someone else was there besides Henry. Someone they couldn't see but felt the weight of their gaze until they left the room. Anne was the only one who didn't believe in these superstitions and therefore willingly took on Henry's tasks. During the 3 weeks since Anne started her job, contrary to what others claimed, she hadn't seen anything unusual about Henry and his room except for his profanities, which often started as soon as she opened the door, even when he needed help. But as time passed, Anne noticed something strange about Henry. She realized this during the night she went to room number 6 to read a book. The only time Henry seemed calm and quiet was when he was reading before sleeping. But Anne noticed that Henry's silence wasn't just because of his love for books. It was because of something he was staring at. At first, it seemed like Henry was looking at his library, but on the following nights when Anne observed him, she realized that Henry's gaze was fixed on another place. In the space between the library and the door of the room, there was an empty and dimly lit space where an average-sized person could easily stand, and that was the spot Henry stared at every night. Anne had lived with her grandmother for years and knew that hallucinations were part of elderly people's lives. For this reason, Henry's fixed gaze and silence didn't seem important to Anne until the night she saw something unbelievable with her own eyes. It was past 2 in the morning, and the nursing home had sunk into silence and darkness. Unlike her colleagues, Anne didn't sleep during work, and that night, to stay awake, she poured herself a cup of coffee and started watching a movie on her phone when the alarm from the nursing home phone went off again. It was Henry's room motion sensor that triggered the alarm. Anne became worried because only one thing could be the reason. Henry had fallen off his bed. As Anne made her way to the room, the alarm didn't stop, but she was also concerned about another issue. Henry's screams could wake everyone up as soon as she opened the door, but to her surprise, when Anne entered the room, there was absolute silence, and this was the first strange thing Anne noticed, but not as strange as what she saw when she turned on the room light. Anne was shocked. Henry had brittle bones and couldn't walk without the help of others. His wheelchair was also away from him, and at the foot of the bed, exactly where Anne had last placed it. And that was the same thing that had terrified Anne as she saw Henry sitting on his bed with all of his library books scattered around him, while, like the previous nights, he was fixated on the empty and dark space next to the library, but this time with a terrified look on his face. Anne was shaken. Who had moved the books? That was the only question in Anne's mind at that moment, and she asked Henry. Henry's only response was his terrified and wide-eyed stare. Henry didn't say anything even in the following days, but Anne had never seen that proud and rude old man look so frightened, a fear that Anne also felt this time, as someone in the room was staring at her, someone other than Henry, who couldn't be seen. Henry was moved to another room later that day, and after months of Anne's work, room number 6 remained the only empty room.